Hello, welcome back to plantcare.club where we care about your plants. On this show, we will talk about your plants, indoor, outdoor, whatever you've got, answer your questions, and do product reviews, which we've slacked on, but eventually, we'll get there eventually. Um, we are still working on our cost of growing series. So in the last show, we did Majesty Palms, Kimberly Queen Ferns, and that gave us a good intro. As I said last time, it's like the easier side of things because when you're working down there in with some of the easier sort of inputs. Today we're going to try to take another step up and look at patio pots and hanging baskets. So on my list, I've got geranium 10-inch hanging baskets and 12-inch patio pots. Now, my background is I have about 6 years of experience with our family business. We have a greenhouse in Ontario, Canada, where we grow hanging baskets, patio pots, 4-inch, 6-inch, 20-inch patio pots, poinsettias, garden mums, and then we have a nursery in Homestead where we grow Mandevilla, Majesties, Kimberleys, all of those items. So the goal of the show is to take the information that we have in the nursery and in the greenhouse and tell you how you can apply it to your own home or your own plants. And in this situation, we're trying to explain why are the costs the way that they are at some of these at your grocery stores or garden centers or whatever it is. So here, this is a little bit less scientific because I'm using some Canadian numbers here. Now, it's not going to be exact, and some of them might be slightly inflated, but just as we had with the last series, with the last episode, all of these numbers are going to be affected by how many plants or pots you're ordering, what's the volume of soil that you're ordering. If you order soil by the bale versus or by the bag that you would buy at your grocery store versus by the truckload, which is usually how we order it, there's an enormous difference in cost there. If you order it from one of the cheaper suppliers versus one of the more expensive suppliers, huge difference there. Some people will try to save money by using compost in their soil. It's not very common anymore, but some people will do that. The type of pot that you use, you can choose a very cheap plastic pot that might not look as good, or you could go with a more high-end decorative pot that's going to cost more. So I'm trying to use like a blanket across the board number on some of this to give you an idea when you go to your local garden center, what's it kind of going to cost. So geranium and hanging baskets. First off, I got a pot at $1.50 and $3.50. So $1.50 for a 10-inch hanging basket. That includes the hanger. And $3.50 for a 12-inch patio pot. I think these numbers are relatively close to what you'd be looking for. As I said, some people are going to get it for way cheaper. Some people are going to get it for way more. It just depends. And if you pay more, you might see a nicer looking pot at your garden center or at your grocery store. It just depends. It really does. The soil, I kept it constant from last time and said $1.15. And you know what? For a 12-inch patio pot, I'm going to change this actually. I'm going to say $1.30 because there's going to be more soil volume in a 12-inch patio pot versus a 10-inch hanging basket, right? Just makes sense. There's a little bit more soil volume in there. The plants itself. So for a geranium hanging basket, you're probably putting 2 or 3 plants in that pot. Now, most people are going to be growing these in a greenhouse structure, and most growers are going to be bringing in the cuttings on their own, rooting them into trays, taking them out of those trays and putting them directly into their own pots. So depending on the series, depending on the variety, depending on who you buy it from, you're going to either use two or three plants, most likely. And the cost is going to come out to roughly, let's say $2. $2 gives you a decent idea of the cost of the cuttings plus the liner that you're working with there, maybe the tray that they're sitting in, all of that kind of stuff. Could be a little bit inflated for a lot of growers, but that gives you a decent idea. For a patio pot on the other side, you don't just have the geraniums in there. This is the I keep saying this that the expression is thrill, fill, and spill on the patio pot. So your thrill would be the center. Let's say it's a cordyline or a green spike or something along those lines in the middle of your patio pot. The fill is the geraniums, and then the spill. Maybe you've got calibrachoa or lizamachi, creeping jenny, something like that coming off the sides of the pot. The point is, you might have 6 plants in there. So I used $3 as a rough cost of what is going into this pot, but that could be a little bit underestimated depending on what you're putting in there. Now, a lot of growers will bring in cuttings, they'll root them, and then as that cutting is growing, a few weeks ago we did something on this, when to pinch your plants, and we mentioned that growers will let the plant root in its liner, and as it's starting to grow out, they might pinch it to give it the right habit. Well, that pinch that a grower does, it actually leaves you with a brand new cutting. And so some growers will plant that cutting into a new liner and grow out that liner. So sometimes that second cutting really doesn't cost them much. The labor, usually there's a royalty on it, but overall it's usually just the labor that is charged at that point. So some of the spill items might actually just be cuttings taken off of earlier plants, and therefore there's not much cost to it. Fertilizer, I kept the same numbers as for Majesties and Kimberleys. And fertilizers and chemicals, really. And this is all going to be so different depending on which series you're working with, how early you're starting your plants. All of those different items are really going to change how much fertilizer you're using. Like if you are starting in, some people will start middle, end of December on their spring crops. Others will start at the beginning of January. And depending on when you're starting, really differentiates how much fertilizer you have to feed your plants with. And if you see any bugs, like if you have a bug problem, you're going to have to use more chemicals. If you don't have a bug problem, maybe you use a little bit less, just preventative sprays here and there or drenches, and you're good to go. Growing space. Now this feeds into what I said last time, that there are going to be second, third, fourth generation farms that maybe they don't have a mortgage, they don't have to pay rent, they don't have to pay any of that stuff. So for some garden centers or growers, they're not going to have anything in this growing space spot. For others, they're going to have a lot more. But growing space, you can imagine if you have one full greenhouse and you're putting all of your plants in there and you divide up the whole space of the greenhouse by how many plants, that's going to give you a little bit of a cost. Now, you have to take the cost of putting up that greenhouse divided by how many years are you going to be able to use it? Well, that's probably a long time. But then you have to add in, well, what is the maintenance? You know, the plastic on the roof has to get changed. The plastic on the walls has to get changed. Irrigation has issues. You're going to have, you know, people bumping into stuff, things break, fans, all of that kind of stuff. So it gives you a rough idea. At $1.20, it gives you a rough idea of the cost to grow in that, let's say, 1 square foot versus 3-4 square feet, whatever it's going to be. The difference here too, and you know what, I probably should put this a little bit higher. I'm going to change the 12-inch patio pot to $1.40, just to illustrate it a little bit better because you can fit less 12-inch patio pots in a space versus a 10-inch hanging basket just based on their size. For most growers and most garden centers, that's probably the truth. Okay, labor. Now, I have a little bit less labor for the now I have a little bit less labor for the 10-inch geranium hanging basket because it is you only have 3 plants in a pot versus for the 12-inch patio pot you might have 5 or 6. 5 or 6 means more people planting. You got more people planting, great. Okay, that's going to mean you need more people to plant on the planting line, on the conveyor belt, or on the ground if they're being planted that way. Um, I think the difference in how many times it's touched is about there really is no difference between the two of them. I'm just trying to think if you are planting a patio pot or a hanging basket, they probably get set onto the conveyor line. They are filled with soil. All the plants are planted into them. The hanging basket hook itself gets put on. It gets set down on the ground and either spaced right away, or once the roots are all set, then it gets spaced, and then it gets put onto a rack and shipped off to a store. So either way, it's about the same amount of labor that's going into the two. Sometimes you're going to have to go through and clean a geranium hanging basket if the timing isn't exactly right, but you might have to do the same thing for a patio pot. So it's the same cost as far as labor goes. The big difference is how many people do you actually need to be standing there planting them into the pot? And for 6 plants versus only 3 plants, there's a little bit of a difference there. Okay, my last number here is heat, and heat is going to affect almost all of the numbers that you see before here. So there are some growers that will grow in their greenhouse all the way through like January, February, March at, let's say, like 18 Celsius or something like that. And then there's other growers that'll try to get away with 13, 14 Celsius. Or let's say even up to like some growers will do 20 Celsius into the 20s somewhere. There's a huge difference in the cost of heat for that. So we have to be cognitive that $1 on both of these is just really a guess. It's really just a toss up in the air. The other factor that goes into the heat is, are these hedged energy costs, or are they just floating energy costs? So sometimes a grower or a nursery will say, okay, I'm just going to buy the energy from the utility provider and I'm not going to enter into a contract. I'm just going to buy it as it comes in. And most of the time, the cost of natural gas, which is the way most greenhouses are heated, the cost of natural gas is pretty low. But then all of a sudden, you get some events where the cost of natural gas just spikes. It goes right up. The Ukraine conflict, that what is going on, but back in 2022 was like the real major focus. The cost of natural gas really spiked during that period because Europe wanted a lot of natural gas and there really wasn't enough to go around. And if you didn't have a contract, if you didn't already have a set agreement on the pricing of your natural gas, you were a little bit up the creek on that one. So this is going to be variant across different growers and different methods of how the plants are actually grown. I have $1 there if you're just listening, and the totals are, the rough total is $8.65 for a 10-inch geranium hanging basket and $12.30 for a 12-inch patio pot. Now, that gives you a decent idea of the cost to grow these plants. And once again, these are in Canadian dollars, so if you were in the US, this would be a little bit less. Actually, I can do a USD conversion because that's easy. Bear with me for a second. Okay, so if you, in US dollars, the cost of a 10-inch hanging basket is $6.41, and the cost of a 12-inch patio pot is $9.11. So the when you actually go to the garden center or to a grocery store and you see that the cost of a 10-inch hanging basket, a classic one up here is two for 25. Does that make sense? Two for 25 on the 10-inch hangers, and for 12-inch patio pots, 29.99. I see that a lot, or 24.99, depending on the grocery store or garden center. So when you see those costs, you have a decent idea of what actually goes into it and why the prices are the way that they are. If you have any questions on that, or if you want to, pick my brain about what some of the other costs are, maybe what the retailers are charging for it. Oh, the other thing that I don't have included in here either, are the costs of transportation. So the assumption here is that once I have heat, that's it. And maybe if a customer is coming to your door, if you have a greenhouse and a customer is coming to your door and they're picking up all the plants from there, then sure, this number makes sense. But you still have to truck this plant, and maybe it's going 10 minutes down the road, maybe it's going 5 hours away. It just depends on who your customer is, how far away they are, everything else. And then of course you can have other packaging materials. Like let's say it's going into a box or it's going onto a pallet. All of those things have to be factored in as well. So this might be a low end estimate, or it could be a higher end estimate if you decide to say, hey, I want to use a cheaper pot, cheaper soil, cheaper plants, cheaper everything. Well, you could get this 12-inch patio pot number right down to $9, no problem, if you really start to cheap out on a lot of the different items across the board. But I'm hoping that the last two episodes gives you an okay idea of how much it costs, and um, gives you an appreciation of what the grower might be going through in order to get that plant to your door. If you have any questions, plantcare.club. We'd be happy to answer them there. Talk to you guys later. Bye.